In this lesson, we're going to focus on the build a sentence questions in the writing section. These questions are short, and they look like little sentence puzzles. Instead of actually writing, you'll arrange given words to form correct English sentences. Our goal in this lesson is to understand how these questions work and how you can approach them using grammar rules, especially word order. In build a sentence questions, you get a sentence with several blanks and a set of 5 to 8 words that you can use to create the sentence. Your job is to drag those words into the blanks so the final sentence is grammatically correct. There is no creative writing here, only choosing the correct order. For example, you might see a short situation like the one here. The prompt is a sentence said by somebody else who says they've missed a call from their mother. Then your task is to create the response. You'll arrange the words below to do that. Correct grammar is the key here. That doesn't mean you have to know all the rules necessarily. If you have enough experience listening to and reading English, the correct word order may sound natural even if you don't know why it's correct. But knowing the rules definitely helps. Okay, let's break up that example question a bit to make sure we understand the structure of the task. Each item begins with a short prompt to give you context, often written like a simple conversation. You will see a first sentence from one person and then a second sentence from another person, which is the one you must complete. The second sentence might have just a couple words already included. Most words will be blank. And below those is a set of options to drag into those spaces. In this case, every option is just a single word, but sometimes the options will include phrases of more than one word, and sometimes there are more options than blanks, so you won't use everything. This missed call example is a simple one, with only single words and the same number of options as blanks. We'll see some slightly different examples later in this video. Let's take a closer look at what skills you'll need. Grammar is a big topic, and there are some specific subjects within grammar that are especially important. The order of subjects, verbs, and objects is a big one, especially the difference between a question and a statement. Sometimes they'll also test whether verbs agree with nouns, like singular versus plural forms, and whether you choose articles correctly, such as a, an, or the. Sometimes the sentence includes a smaller clause inside a larger one, like I agree that. And you need to recognize how those structures affect word order. It can also help to consider the meanings of words to connect them, but that's a bit less important than knowing and using the right grammar structures. There are a few common mistakes that students make on this task. One is mixing up question structures and statement structures, such as confusing where is it with where it is. When we have a question, the verb structure changes. To be verbs and helper verbs like can move earlier in the sentence, before the subject. But that pattern changes when the question is turned into a clause within a statement. So I don't know where it is the correct structure, not I don't know where is it. In that case, the sentence order is similar to the simple statement, it is here. The word it comes before the word is. Similarly, in a yes or no question, we need to move the word do to before the subject. Do you know is the correct structure for a question, while you do know is the correct order for a statement. Time expressions can also cause problems when they are placed in unnatural positions, like I this morning left, instead of I left this morning. Another issue is using the wrong verb form, for example, choosing are, when the subject is singular and needs is. Now let's look at another example question. You see the sentence, I finally finished the report, which gives you the situation. Somebody has said this statement to you, and now you need to respond. Below that is a question with several blanks and a word bank that includes could, later, send, you, today, and it. At this stage, you are not filling in anything yet. You are simply noticing that the sentence is a question, that it will probably start with a helper verb, and that the rest of the words must form a polite request related to sending the report. So let's start with that structure. Because it's a question, the helper verb, could, will come before the subject, you. Once we put those words in place, the sentence begins to take shape. Once we choose could you as the opening, many other word orders become impossible. We haven't yet placed the main verb, for example, and we know that needs to come soon after the subject, you. The only verb in the options is the word send. All right, in that case, let's add the main verb and the object, which forms send it. The pronoun it refers to the report, and it must come right after the verb. At this point, we still have 2 blanks for the time expressions, and we know they will describe when the report should be sent. Lastly, we place the time expressions later today at the end to complete the sentence. Could you send it to me later today? This example shows that if you identify the sentence type, choose a good starting point, and then attach verbs, objects, and time phrases in logical order. The correct answer forms piece by piece. Okay, let's move on to one more example. The context sentence says, what are the best places to visit in Europe? Below that is another sentence with blanks and a word bank that includes if, have, a recommendation, I, personal favorites, some, and would like. Notice that this time, some of the options are phrases with more than one word. Those will help limit our options a bit. and make it a bit easier to see the main idea of the sentence even before we build it. Noticing the words a recommendation and personal favorites, we can guess that this response will be an offer to give some vacation recommendations. From there, let's break up our choices a bit. Every sentence in English needs a subject and a verb. So, what are our options? The nouns that could be subjects are I, personal favorites, and a recommendation. Meanwhile, the verbs are only have and would like. Which subject and which verb are most likely to start this sentence? For our subject, personal favorites and a recommendation don't work well with our verb options, but the word I works great. If we start with I, then we need a verb to match. If we use would like as our verb, then it will be hard to make a sentence that offers a recommendation. That sounds like a request. Instead, let's try I have. That's a good start, but we still have several words to place. And at this point, it's difficult to choose between a recommendation and personal favorites for the next word. So let's instead look later in the sentence. We still need to place the phrase would like. What will be the subject of that verb? By matching would like to the word you that was already given to us, we start to see the bigger picture. We also placed the word if before you to make the phrase if you would like. Now the final blanks will be much easier. We have 2 blanks in the first half of the sentence. From our 3 remaining options, only 2 of them can combine well in the way we need. Some personal favorites is our best combination of 2 options. Putting everything together, we get the full sentence. I have some personal favorites if you would like a recommendation. The first clause tells us that the speaker has favorite places, and the second offers to help the person who is choosing their vacation location. That makes sense as a reply to our original sentence and uses the correct word order for a statement. Once we have the full sentence finished, it's a good idea to read it one more time to make sure everything is in the right place. Accidentally dropping into the wrong blank is easy to do if you are hurried. Taking just a moment to check your answer is always smart. To summarize, build a sentence questions test grammar and word order in a short, puzzle-like way. A good approach is to look for the sentence type first, question or statement, and then build outward from a clear subject and verb. Use your knowledge of common English patterns to choose natural combinations and eliminate impossible word orders. These items are short, and they go by quickly, but be careful not to rush them. It's easy to make a small mistake and lose points if you don't double-check your work. So taking a calm, step-by-step approach will help you get the most points from this part of the writing section. Let's take a closer look at the clues that the test makers give you for the build a sentence questions. Each question will have a couple things to consider before you start organizing the words. There are 3 kinds of clues you can work with. First, you have the prompt context, the sentence spoken by the first person, preceding the response that you will build. Second, you have the pre-filled words already placed in the sentence. Sometimes there are none of these, and sometimes there are 2 or 3. Finally, you have the punctuation mark at the end of the sentence that you'll build. None of these are random. Each one informs your choices and quietly guides you toward a grammatically correct sentence. The most obvious clue is also usually the least helpful one. The prompt context. It mostly tells you the topic and situation, not the structure of the sentence. Focusing on it too much may cause more confusion than clarity, because it's not always very naturally connected to the response sentence. For example, in a normal conversation, if this man said, "Do you know where we're meeting the new supervisor?" the person responding probably wouldn't also say the phrase, "the new supervisor." A more natural response would just say they or her. But the TOEFL doesn't care about making perfectly natural conversation in this task. It cares about making grammatically correct sentences that can only be arranged in one correct way. As a result, the correct response might have some unnatural repetition, or it may feel slightly off topic. So overall, the prompt is useful for getting the general topic of your sentence, but it's not very useful for deciding word order. The pre-filled words are much more helpful. These words already sit in fixed positions, so your job is to figure out what can logically come before and after them. In this example, we see the word can early in the sentence. That narrows your options. It could be a question starting with a question word like where, or it could be a statement starting with a subject like you. Punctuation is the most important clue in this task. A period tells you this must be a statement, which, when combined with the word can, tells us that the first word of this sentence has to be a subject. On the other hand, if this sentence ended with a question mark, then the first word would be a question word. We'll go into more detail on this in a separate lesson on subject-verb-object ordering. But remember, always look at the punctuation first. It tells you what kind of sentence you're building. Here's a bonus tip that makes punctuation even more powerful. In build a sentence questions, the first person sentence and your response are opposite types. If the first person says a statement, your answer will be a question. And if the first person asks a question, your answer will be a statement. So before you even look at the word bank, glance at the first person's sentence. If it's a statement, you already know you're building a question. And if it's a question, you're building a statement. Combined with the punctuation mark at the end, you now have two clues confirming the same thing. Okay, now let's go through this example with all the clues in mind. We're given a short context about meeting a new supervisor, along with a sentence frame and a word bank. At this stage, the goal isn't to place every word perfectly. It's simply to decide what kind of sentence makes sense and which words are likely to appear near the beginning. We see that the response ends in a period, so we will create a statement. With that in mind, we know we're starting with a subject, not a question word, and after the helper verb can, we need a main verb. Looking at our options, the best options for the subject are the words you or I. Meanwhile, the only option for the main verb is the word show. Combine that with our original prompt. Starting the sentence with you can show seems strange. It's much more likely I can show. Okay, then what? What can I show? And to who? From here on, the clues no longer are very important. We will use what we already placed and add the remaining words based on that. As more words fall into place, the sentence structure becomes clearer. The word show can take two objects, as we see here. When we have two objects, we can either use the structure, I showed you it, or I showed it to you. There's no to in our options here, so we will start with the person, you. Then the word where starts a noun clause. The final two blanks here might cause trouble for some people. When we have a noun clause like this, the structure is where her office is, not where is her office. Because it's not a question, the verb is comes after the subject, her office. So, as a whole, we have the sentence, I can show you where her office is. When you have the full sentence finished, it's a good idea to read it to yourself once or twice, just to be sure that you didn't accidentally mix up the placement of two words. One more thing to watch for. Occasionally, you'll have one more answer choice than there are blanks. When this happens, one of the choices doesn't belong in the sentence at all. The extra choice is almost always a wrong verb form. For example, showing, when the correct word is show, or did, when the correct word is have. So if you finish the sentence and have one piece left over, don't panic. That can happen sometimes. Just double check that the leftover word truly doesn't fit anywhere, and move on. Let's recap. Clues help you decide where words belong, but not all clues are equally important. The prompt gives you the topic, the pre-filled words give you some of structure, and the punctuation tells you whether to use question or statement verb ordering. Start with the words closest to the pre-filled ones, and use your knowledge of English grammar and feelings about what sounds right to do the rest. In this lesson, we're going to focus on subject-verb-object ordering, often called SVO order. This is a core piece of English grammar, so it's important for the writing section, especially for build a sentence tasks. Let's start with what SVO actually means. In English, most sentences follow the order of subject first, then verb, and then object, if there is an object. The subject is who or what does the action, the verb is the action itself, and the object is who or what receives that action. Some verbs don't require objects, but the subject and verb are always required. Even when the subject or verb is a longer phrase, like what we see in the second example here, the basic order stays the same. You might say that the subject is just the library, but we can also think in terms of phrases, not just individual words. Build a sentence questions are mainly testing whether you understand correct word order, so subject-verb ordering is important. By starting with this basic structure, we can make answering these types of questions more systematic, but there's an extra, super important point here. Most of the sentences that you build are actually questions, not statements, and questions have some special rules for where verbs go. So to make this easier, it helps to follow a system. First, identify the subject and verb options, then check whether the sentence is a question. If it is, look for question words and helper verbs to guide the structure. When a sentence becomes a question, the word order changes a bit. In both yes or no questions and open-ended questions, helper verbs come before the subject. For example, in a statement, the subject comes first, but in a question, the helper verb moves to the front. Notice the word did in the first example. That's part of the verb, but it is before the word professor, which is the subject. And if we add in a question word like where, the same structure follows. So if we have a question mark at the end of the sentence that we are building, then we need to watch for helper verbs like did, will, can, may, etc. Those will come early in the sentence, before the subject. Now let's look more closely at a pattern that causes trouble for a lot of people. We're comparing questions and noun clauses. A direct question uses question word order with the helper verb before the subject, but when that same question appears inside a longer sentence as a noun clause, the word order changes back to normal SVO order. This is a very common pattern that the TOEFL will test. So, for example, in a simple statement, we would say, the movie is almost over. And when we change that to a question, then the word is moves earlier. We get, is the movie almost over? But importantly, if we put that whole question inside another question, asking, do you know? Then the word is moves back to where it was before. Now the main verb is know, and the main subject is you. The part about the movie has moved to a noun clause, and as a result, the word is moved back to its normal placement, not the question placement. Here's another example showing the same idea. In the normal statement, we have the subject you, then the verb phrase can find. Then, in the question form, the helper verb comes before the subject, so the order becomes can I find. But inside a noun clause, the helper verb moves back. It stays with the main verb, find. Even though the sentence still contains a question word, the structure is no longer a question. All right, so let's try all this with an example of a build a sentence question. Take a moment to pause the video and try answering this yourself. As you do, think about which words could be in the subject and which could be in the verb. Take it step by step. First, let's look at our subject possibilities, which are in pink, and our verb possibilities, which are in green. At the same time, we should notice that this sentence is a question. That means we will probably have a helper verb, then a subject, then a main verb. The best option for the main verb is the word know. And with that in mind, the best option for our subject is the word you. Since this is a question, we probably also want the helper verb do at the beginning. That gives us the start of our question. Do you know? But we still have the verb are in the answer options. And if we look closely, we also see the word if in those options. If can be used to make a noun clause, similar to a question word like where or what. Let's try using that next. Now we have do you know if. The word if starts a noun clause, which will have its own subject and verb. The only options left are the words there and are. Once we put those into place, our sentence is almost complete. The final blank must be the word available. As a last step, it's always smart to reread the sentence at least one time. It's too easy to place words in the wrong order by accident and then not notice. You want to double or triple check that you put all the words where you think you put them. So our final sentence is, do you know if there are any tables available? And that is indeed correct. To summarize, correct English sentences always follow subject then verb order. Question structures are extremely common in build a sentence tasks, and those questions change the word order by moving helper verbs before the subject. However, when a question appears inside a sentence as a noun clause, the helper verb moves back to normal position. So, as you build sentences, practice by first identifying nouns and verbs, including helper verbs, and be sure to check whether you're building a question or a statement. In build a sentence questions, grammar isn't something you fix at the end. It actively limits what you can build. Word agreement is a convenient way to narrow options because mismatched words simply cannot go together. Word agreement means that certain parts of a sentence must match. This includes number such as singular versus plural, person such as I, you, or they, and tense such as past or present. For the build a sentence tasks, we'll mostly pay attention to number. The other types of agreement are important in general, but just aren't as helpful for this specific task. When you start a build a sentence task, you'll usually want to find the possible subjects and verbs, but word agreement will limit which ones can go together. For example, a plural subject cannot take a singular verb. These results shows is incorrect, while these results show works. There is no possible way to have a plural subject and a singular verb, so that single letter S changes which structures are allowed. That's why agreement is such a powerful tool in this task. It removes options before you think about meaning. That example was a case of subject-verb agreement, which is the most important type of agreement when building sentences like this, but it's not always so simple. Sometimes the subject and the verb aren't right next to each other, but we still need them to match. This matters because build a sentence tasks often include long noun phrases or prepositional phrases that distract from the main subject. In the sentence, the list of items is